Today's an interesting video, at least I think so, because today we're talking about the process by which the video game industry went woke through the lens of a pretty widespread claim that was made a few months ago. The claim was that a company called Sweet Baby Incorporated had somehow contributed to the phenomenon where video game narratives are being deliberately constructed for the purpose of ticking off diversity checkboxes, which in turn qualifies them for ESG investments. ESG meaning environmental, social, and governance in this case, from major companies like Blackrock. It sounds complicated, but the idea itself is pretty straightforward. Investment companies like BlackRock allegedly have a kind of scorecard. That scorecard factors in things like diversity, inclusion, LGBTQ allyship, etc., and the scores that these companies receive qualify them or disqualify them from being the target of investment, which has further downstream impacts. The particular claim we're looking at today asserts that video game publishers have increasingly turned to a company called Sweet Baby Incorporated, among others, so as to boost their effective score by modifying their games with woke-style themes or narratives, thereby qualifying them for additional investments, aka going woke. Now, I fully understand that today's topic is highly politicized. I'm not trying to do that, it's just an objective fact here, so please keep in mind that I'll be attempting to go purely analytical, staying away from opinionated jabs and commentary on what I actually think of the current gaming landscape. I certainly have opinions, don't get me wrong, but this video is about looking at patterns, not rambling about grievances. There's plenty of that circulating on social media right now. I've certainly done it myself in the past, but today I'm much more interested in what's actually happening behind the scenes because the general accusation, gaming has gone woke, is extremely common, yet often said with very little deeper analysis. Let's get started. This is Sweet Baby Incorporated. This company in particular came under fire a few months ago from a variety of angles, resulting in them turning some of their social media private, probably because they got harassed, which does happen when you become the target of YouTube videos en masse. But with that in mind, I'm not actually focusing on whether or not Sweet Baby Incorporated individually is the reason video games went woke. I'm focusing on the concept of whether or not companies like them have an incentive to exist, and whether or not major publishers or development studios have an incentive to hire them. If those two things prove to be true, well, that obviously tells us something. And here's a bit of a spoiler. It's pretty obvious, in my opinion, that yes, those two things are currently true. Once again, this is Sweet Baby Incorporated. It is a, quote, narrative development and consultation studio based in Montreal with a mission to tell better, more empathetic stories while diversifying and enriching the video games industry, end quote. On the surface, to be completely honest, that's not very interesting. It gets a little bit weirder when you listen to some of the things that their executives have said publicly, sure, but the most interesting part is their client list. Xbox Game Studios, EA, Electronic Arts that is, Valve, 2K, Ubisoft, Square Enix, Warner Brothers, Rocksteady, Avalanche, Compulsion Games, etc. The list is very long and also includes a large number of industry-leading publishers as well as development studios. For Sweet Baby as a business, that's great, but for the topic today, we need to understand what it is they actually do. The best way to describe this, without going down a pretty hefty rabbit hole here, is to read this paragraph from their Approach info page. Quote, we believe that representation is key to connecting players and audiences, and we offer a few ways to help your team and project gain the perspective needed to make it happen. We're part of an inclusive and knowledgeable community of diverse consultants, able to cover a wide range of cultural and sensitivity topics. Our approach leads with the creation of joy in marginalized players and seeks to be additive rather than strictly corrective. We do cultural consultation, sensitivity and inclusivity reading, risk and opportunities assessment, and more, end quote. See, that's the type of stuff that people generally talk about or refer to when they say the word woke. Sensitivity reading means reading something and determining who might possibly be offended, which might be okay, surface level, sure, except for when obscure or irrelevant demographics are considered, or invented, rather, leading to dramatic corrections, as they also discuss, which are then made to the game, ultimately destroying its appeal to the pre-existing fan base. Whether you're for it or against it, the idea of hiring a consultation firm to help make your game more sensitive, inclusive, and diverse is a practice that is now rather common. And again, that is what people are referring to when they say that the video game industry has gone woke. But the question is why? Short answer, ESG, environmental social governance. That's what people tell you who criticize the practice, but what's actually happening? This is Blackrock. Blackrock is a multinational investment firm. You've probably heard of it many times before, and it's the world's largest individual corporate asset manager. On a similar level is Vanguard, another multinational investment company managing over $7.7 trillion in this case. And these two firms, among many others out there, have something in common. They both prioritize ESG investments. ESG focused investing is a financial phenomenon or trend, if you will. According to a PwC report, quote, asset managers globally are expected to increase their ESG related assets under management, AUM, to 33.9 trillion by 2026, end quote. And what's even more substantial, ESG assets are on pace to constitute 21.5% of total global assets under management in less than 5 years. Simply put, ESG investing is a viral phenomenon where the social, environmental, and political conscience of an asset, or company rather, is allegedly at the core of whether or not major investment firms will include it in their portfolios. So much so that prominent businesses now publish what are called ESG reports. Here's one from Kraft Heinz, the company behind ketchup, in 2022. It has an entire section called Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging. More specific to gaming, if you want that, here's an ESG report from Activision Blizzard in 2021. The word diversity is mentioned 39 times, and the report very specifically emphasizes more characters in the video games that they produce from LGBTQ backgrounds or non-binary representation. Now, this matters because Blackrock and Vanguard, both of them, under their asset umbrella, if you will, have numerous different funds dedicated to the concept of ESG, which is specifically why these large companies are trying so hard to fit in. One important side note for later in the video from the Vanguard ESG stock ETF, quote, the index excludes the stocks of companies that FTSE determines engage in, have a specified level of involvement in, and or derive threshold amounts of revenue, that's important, threshold amounts of revenue, from one or more of the following activities, including, further down, own and or operate a gambling establishment, end quote. My point is that these investment funds have rules, kind of ethical rules, really, and that gaming companies in particular are attempting to conform to said rules. However, let's go one step further and make it completely obvious. Remember that list of companies that hired Sweet Baby Incorporated that they brag about on their official website? Let's look at those, starting with Electronic Arts. The largest two institutional shareholders of EA, BlackRock and Vanguard. Take-Two Interactive, another name on the list of Sweet Baby clients by way of 2K. Largest institutional holders, Vanguard and BlackRock. Warner Brothers, again, Sweet Baby client, largest holders, Vanguard, then BlackRock, and the list goes on. See, the corporate tree of life, as I call it in a demented way, makes it even more obvious because the other names on that list, the list of Sweet Baby clients that is, are almost all related in some capacity as well, even if BlackRock or Vanguard are not directly holding their company's stock. Example, Warner Brothers in 2010, a while ago, acquired a majority stake in Rocksteady Studios, meaning that yet another client on the list is directly connected through its parent organization, and the same is true for practically every single name you see. Microsoft, largest institutional holders, surprise, surprise, Vanguard, BlackRock, and this was true for Activision Blizzard as well, even before the buyout. As of October 12, 2023, BlackRock owned 56 million shares of the company, accounting for 7.2% of its total, and Vanguard owned over 61 million, 7.9%. Microsoft also owns Compulsion Games, surprise, surprise, yet another name on the list of Sweet Baby Incorporated, but you get the point. These companies, the ones hiring Sweet Baby, unilaterally enjoy substantial investment from two of the world's largest asset holders who champion the concept of ESG in their investing portfolios, which heavily incentivizes shoehorn diversity, thereby feeding the cycle and creating an industry norm where publishers play ball, kind of, and make their products look better for the purpose of appeasing this larger agenda, only to have their original audiences wondering what the hell happened when the products become unrecognizable. Make sense? Just one problem. This whole thing is a sham. Remember that requirement, the one we briefly read from the Vanguard ETF about excluding gambling? Yeah, that's a pretty normal provision for most of these funds, but half of the modern video game world is now predicated on blatant underage gambling. Loot boxes, surprise mechanics, whatever you want to call them, it's gambling. But that doesn't really matter because the point isn't to actually have ethical investments. The point is to look like you do through the lens of modern social expectations. Let me expand on that. According to analysis done by Gianpaolo Pari and Mirko Rubin, I think is how you say that, published by Vox EU in October of 2023, titled Smoke and Mirrors, A Look Inside ESG Fund Portfolios. Quote, as a final piece of evidence, we calculate the hypothetical returns a fund would earn based on the disclosed portfolio and compare them to its realized returns. In Figure 2, we observe that in the 10 days leading up to disclosure, funds tend to underperform the portfolio they are about to disclose. This observation is consistent with the idea, during this period, they incur meaningful transaction costs as they adjust their portfolio to include more environmentally friendly and sustainable assets. However, following the disclosure event, we notice a shift in performance dynamics. Funds begin to outperform the portfolio that they have just disclosed, indicating that they are now holding higher paying assets than the ones they have recently made public. This trend is in line with the hypothesis that after the disclosure event, funds might replace some ESG assets with higher yielding but less sustainable assets. End quote. Simplified, before disclosing what assets they hold, ESG funds are rearranging themselves to look good, only to sell off those assets immediately and invest back into whatever is just most profitable. Smoke and mirrors. Here's an even better example that's also pertinent to the gaming industry. Activision Blizzard, the company rocked by sexual harassment lawsuits, worker mistreatment scandals, employee walkouts, and governmental investigations. Yeah, they're perfectly fine for these funds, apparently. They have a board of directors that's 20% women and 20% underrepresented minorities, according to their ESG reports, so they're good to go. And as such, were included in many of the funds that Blackrock and Vanguard offer as an ESG compliant company. Even the Wall Street Journal itself openly admits, quote, asset managers seem willing to include any company paying lip service to progressive priorities, end quote. Companies like Sustainalytics and Permutable AI publish reports aimed at analyzing the ESG score of different organizations, and those reports are allegedly used by BlackRock, Vanguard, and presumably others as well to allocate funds. The problem? Those reports merely seem to establish a surface-level score, failing to consider even monumental issues with the company internally, like reliance on underage gambling as a revenue stream, a large one at that, or widespread worker abuse as well, focusing instead on things like self-disclosed ESG reports, where a company brags about what percentage of its executive board are non-binary. The results? Companies like Activision Blizzard are included in the environmental social governance funds, while publishers become incentivized to hire consultants like Sweet Baby Incorporated because the surface-level narrative changes that they make to their intellectual property and franchise video games are somehow impactful enough here to place them in the good graces of the world's largest asset managers. Not because they did anything good, but because they look good on paper according to a very narrow set of criteria, so that holding their stock is deemed ethical at specific points in time. Bottom line, Sweet Baby Incorporated is not responsible for video games going woke. It's merely profiting off a general demand for that end, helping them do it by making the products seem that way, so that publishers can align themselves with a financial trend that demands diversity and inclusion, all for the optics of an asset fund. At least, that's what it looks like to me if I step back and try to see the full picture. In the end, the idea that video games have gone woke seems to be based on a measurable push to have parent organizations and publicly traded companies associated with video games included in ESG funds by altering their products and paying lip service to the ideals that these funds pretend, once in a while, to be based on. That's it. If you want to support the channel, please check out the links down below, especially Patreon and Locals for monthly memberships. Much appreciated. I'm currently still emailing with GoFundMe about refunds for the lawsuit, the crowdfund that took place. And the latest communication is that there needs to be an international wire transfer to one of the payment providers. And it's a whole complicated process that takes quite a bit of time. But it's happening. And one way or another, you guys will get your money hopefully next week, but it may be a little bit after that. Anyway, I'll keep you posted every step of the way. When it does happen, there's a new merchandise initiative I have to announce as well in tandem. Some other stuff too. If you want a VPN, there's a link down below. Of course, Surfshark is a channel partner. Definitely use that link, etc., etc. But I'll cut it there and stop rambling. As always, thank you all for watching. Question everything, and have a nice night.